Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Today, we are tackling something huge. Really, possibly one of the most monumental shifts in, well, how we exist since the digital age picked off. We're talking about predictive governance.
Yeah, and we're moving way beyond just crunching numbers here.
Exactly. We're looking at a proposed architecture, one that's incredibly ambitious. It potentially offers real-time control over massive, complex systems, and crucially, that includes some of the highest-risk human activities.
It's not overstating it to say this could redefine control. This deep dive, it centers on a really detailed framework. It's called the All Criminal Elements AI Pattern Recognition System, APR for short.
APR.
Okay, and you shouldn't think of it like just another software program. It's more like a universal adaptive mechanism. Its whole purpose, its mandate, is to constantly recognize, predict, and then explain patterns across the immediate moment, looking back historically, and even projecting into the future.
That scope, universal, continuous, that's what makes this feel so agent, doesn't it? It sounds like a complete rethink of how society manages risk.
It absolutely is. The main goal of this APR idea is to achieve, well, radical efficiency by always recognizing, predicting, explaining patterns linked to all criminal elements. Now, to do that...
It needs data. Lots of data.
Exactly. It requires continuous dynamic monitoring, which means collecting data on pretty much all activities at all levels within whatever domain it's operating in. It basically tries to leave no informational stone unturned.
Okay, and right there, that immediately sets up the core tension for our discussion today, right? The duality of this tech. On one hand, you see the potential benefits, managing huge risks, making things way more efficient, cutting down human error. Seems massive.
Immense, potentially.
But then deploying something so pervasive, this sort of all-seeing capability, especially in really sensitive areas like criminal justice, well, it throws up these profound ethical and governance challenges. Challenges that could, frankly, outweigh any efficiency gains.
We absolutely have to hold on to that tension. This technical push for hyper-efficient control, often sold under the banner of security and safety, it inherently risks creating a surveillance society.
Right.
A system where widespread social control isn't just possible, it's kind of the default setting. So the value of APR, you can't just judge it by how accurate its predictions are, and they'll likely be very accurate.
Yeah, probably disturbingly so.
Disturbingly so, possibly. It has to be judged by how strictly it adheres to human values, things like transparency, accountability, and just basic fairness.
Okay, let's unpack the technical side then. If the goal is this continuous, dynamic, real-time control, how does the AI actually process the messy, unpredictable reality of human systems to make these incredibly high-stakes predictions? What does that specialized algorithmic architecture even look like?
Right, we're really at the cutting edge here. This is far beyond what basic statistical models can handle, because the APR needs to process continuous, time-dependent information, what data scientists call time series analysis. It needs specialized, advanced deep learning tools. Mechanisms designed to pick up on subtle nuances and dependencies over time.
So why can't the older, simpler models cut it? What's missing for this level of pattern finding?
Well, those simpler models, they really struggle to track long-range dependencies, especially in volatile data over long periods. So the core mechanisms APR would use for this deep pattern discovery, they include things like convolutional neural networks, CNNs.
Right, often used for images.
Exactly. And recurrent neural networks, RNNs, and crucially, these sophisticated transformer architectures. RNNs were used for sequential data before, but they had limitations processing really long sequences efficiently.
And that's where the transformer comes in, I'm guessing?
Precisely. The transformer architecture is so important because it lets the system process very long sequences in parallel. It can efficiently capture relationships and context across huge stretches of time-based data. Imagine analyzing, say, 5 years of someone's financial transactions alongside 2 years of their location data simultaneously.
Yeah.
That parallel processing is absolutely necessary to maintain real-time dynamic monitoring, especially if you're doing it on a population scale.
Okay, now data fusion. You mentioned this, and it sounds like maybe the biggest technical mountain to climb. How do you possibly take wildly different kinds of information like biometric data from a door scanner, satellite images of traffic, social media posts, and somehow blend them into one coherent picture?
That synthesis, that's a core innovation, really. The system has to normalize these completely different streams, turn them into a consistent data structure. It's called a high-dimensional temporal graph.
High-dimensional temporal graph. Okay, break that down.
Think of it like this. The graph maps entities, people, places, cars, whatever, as nodes, like points on a map.
Got it.
And their interactions, or maybe just how close they are. Those are the edges, the lines connecting the points. The temporal part just means every single node and every single edge has a timestamp attached.
Okay, so it tracks everything over time.
Continuously. And the high-dimensional part means that each thing, each entity, isn't just described by one simple variable like its location. It can be described by potentially hundreds of variables all at once. Behavioral patterns, biometric IDs, spending habits, who they talk to online, how strong those connections are.
It sounds like the system is basically building and constantly updating this incredibly detailed, multi-layered map of reality, where everything and everyone casts this continuous, measurable, informational shadow.
That's a really good way to put it, an informational shadow. And it's that shadow the system analyzes constantly, looking for the tiniest deviation, the slightest anomaly. So the primary job of ACE APR isn't necessarily to predict one specific event, like a crime will happen here tomorrow at 2 p.m. It's more about maintaining control by defining and enforcing baselines of behavior.
Okay, so it establishes control by figuring out what's normal and not normal for everything it watches.
Exactly. And it figures this out using very sophisticated machine learning techniques, clustering, classification. These map out statistically derived thresholds for behavior, what falls within the expected range.
So the prediction isn't like crystal ball gazing. It's more like the system spots something statistically weird, something that deviates significantly from the established pattern.
That's precisely the mechanism, anomaly detection. For example, imagine it's monitoring global supply chains. The system learns the usual flow of goods, normal customs times, transport routes, payment sequences.
Right.
Now, if one specific shipping container suddenly deviates, maybe spends way too long stopped in some unauthorized location, that deviation throws up an anomaly flag. It signals a potential risk, like smuggling or theft.
And if you apply that same logic to human behavior.
Precisely. The system can detect really subtle shifts away from established norms, whether that's for an individual or for a whole population group.
Like what kind of shifts?
Well, the source material mentions things like a sudden change in overall activity level for someone maybe already considered high risk, or perhaps an unexpected shift in movement patterns within a specific city zone. By calculating these deviations in real time against its learned baseline.
You can focus resources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It maximizes monitoring efficiency. Scarce human resources aren't wasted on random checks. They're directed only to the specific statistical anomaly instead of, indiscriminate blanket surveillance.
Okay, but here's where the governance challenge really bites, right? This need for real-time adaptive learning. The system has to constantly update its own rules based on what worked, what didn't, successful predictions, errors. It needs to self-correct to stay useful against threats that are also constantly changing.
That constant change, that perpetual mutation of the rules is absolutely central to why it's useful. But it's devastating for traditional oversight. Because if the system's logic is always shifting, you can't do a static audit. You can't just look at the code today and say, yep, it's compliant, and expect that to hold true 6 months down the line. The rules might be completely different by then.
And that inability to kind of freeze the logic, that's what puts this extraordinary burden, as the source calls it, on explainable AI, on XAI, to maintain any kind of trust, especially in the legal system.
Absolutely. The logic has to be explainable at the moment the system flags something or recommends an intervention. It doesn't matter how many times the underlying model has tweaked itself since its last review.
And that dynamic is critical because if the AI's definition of normal comes from training data that already reflects historical biases, say, data gathered mostly from neighborhoods that were heavily policed,
then the algorithm's baseline, its whole understanding of normal, is structurally flawed right from the start.
so it risks automatically labeling everyday activities in certain communities as suspicious.
That's the danger. It could statistically define the typical, perfectly legal activities of certain socioeconomic or ethnic groups as high-risk anomalies. It ends up structurally reproducing inequality, not objectively predicting actual criminal intent.
And that structural flaw takes us straight into the core ethical crisis here, this whole pursuit of security and safety through the ACE APR model. It's the very thing that risks creating a surveillance society, where this kind of generalized social control just becomes normal.
And the root of the problem fundamentally is algorithmic bias.
The data itself.
The data is the original sin, you could say. Algorithmic bias happens when you have systematic errors baked into the training data. Maybe it's not representative of the whole population or reflects historical biases, and the AI just learns those biases and reproduces them in its output.
So the system isn't learning objective reality, it's learning the world as it was already policed and structured by human bias.
Perfectly put. If the historical data shows discriminatory policing, more stops, more arrests in specific neighborhoods for specific groups, then the predictions based on that data will carry that same historical bias forward.
It essentially hard codes discrimination into the future.
That is the really insidious risk. The AI, while trying to learn what criminal elements look like based on past data, might end up statistically flagging the everyday, non-criminal behaviors of historically over-policed communities as significant deviations, as anomalies, which inflates their risk score.
That's an inflated score.
That computational process then risks giving judges or authorities what you might call algorithm-derived permission to treat certain groups more harshly, not based on proven actions, but on a calculated probability of future risk. We move away from the ideal of blind justice towards a kind of statistically biased justice.
We really need to make this concrete. Let's look at a real-world example where this went wrong. The controversy around the COMPAS algorithm, that's correctional offender management profiling for alternative sanctions in Broward County, Florida. That's kind of the textbook case, isn't it?
It really is. COMPAS was used quite widely. Its job was to assess the risk that a defendant would reoffend, to help judges with sentencing and bail decisions. But the analysis done by ProPublica, they spent a lot of time digging into thousands of these predictions.
Well,
It was damning.
what did the ProPublica analysis find that really showed the bias?
They found significant racial disparity in its errors. Specifically, Black defendants who actually did not go on to commit a new crime were much more likely to be wrongly labeled as high risk by COMPAS. That's a high rate of false positives for that group.
Okay, so it overpredicted risk for Black defendants.
Right. And conversely, white defendants who did actually reoffend were more often mistakenly labeled as low risk, a high rate of false negatives for them.
So even if the inputs seemed neutral, the error rates were wildly different depending on race. The whole promise of objective, efficient risk assessment just collapsed.
It completely collapsed. The system was functionally biased, period. And the consequence was that Black defendants faced harsher outcomes, longer sentences, higher bail based purely on an inaccurate but algorithmically approved high-risk score.
That failure really drives home the point, doesn't it? If a relatively focused system like COMPAS could fail so badly, the risks with a universal system like APR, they're exponentially higher unless the governance is absolutely watertight.
Absolutely. It's a stark warning.
Let's talk about how APR changes the nature of policing. We seem to be shifting from reacting to crime after it happens towards proactively prospecting, looking for places and people where crime might occur in the future, using mass, dynamic surveillance. The source calls this predictive hyper-crime control.
It's a radical shift, yeah, because it fundamentally alters the relationship between the citizen and the state. Traditionally, police contact required some kind of reasonable suspicion, some action. APR seems to validate this idea of a comprehensive social control regime where people can be tracked and monitored preemptively.
Just based on a risk score?
Potentially. And this proactive approach is often governed by what the source calls the state company citizen trinity.
The state company citizen trinity. That sounds concerning. Like a breakdown of checks and balances. How does that work?
It describes this new power dynamic. You have the state, which provides the legal authority and the enforcement power.
Right.
Then you have private companies who develop and provide these proprietary, often very opaque, high-risk AI systems. And they also often hold the vast amounts of data needed to train them.
Okay, state and company.
And then you have the citizen. The citizen is the subject, the one being continuously monitored and scored. They provide the raw data for the companies and become the targets for the state's interventions. This fusion often means that high-risk profiling gets outsourced to private, profit-driven companies that might lack public accountability, creating this layer of opacity.
And the most chilling danger here is intervening before anything has actually happened.
That's the crux of it. The moment the system generates a risk score and recommends intervention, maybe putting someone under surveillance, even if they've had zero prior contact with the police based purely on that score derived from all this mixed data. That's a fundamental change.
And the awareness of being constantly watched.
Yeah.
The panopticon effect.
Exactly. That awareness, the knowledge that you could be monitored at any time, it inevitably creates a chilling effect on individual behavior, on autonomy.
How does that chilling effect actually play out in everyday life or maybe in politics?
Well, if every move you make, every purchase, every online interaction is potentially being measured against some personalized normal threshold, people are likely to start self-censoring. They might alter their behavior to conform to what they think the algorithm expects.
So less dissent, less exploring unusual ideas.
Potentially, yeah. Minimizing any activity that might flag you as an anomaly. This kind of proactive elimination of behavioral deviance really undercuts fundamental freedoms, freedom of association, freedom of expression. It pushes us towards a state of maximum prediction, maybe, but also minimum human agency.
Okay, so if unchecked efficiency is the big risk, then human governance has to be the counter pattern, the pattern we design and enforce rigorously. How on earth do you regulate a system like ACE APR, something so advanced, dynamic, always adapting, with the potential to fundamentally reshape human rights?
Well, the first step has to be legal classification, mandatory classification. Given what ACAPR is designed to do, profile people using automated processing of personal data, assess reliability, behavior, track movement, it absolutely must be classified as a high-risk AI system.
Under frameworks like the EU AI Act.
Exactly. Like the EU AI Act, which is leading the way here. That high-risk classification isn't optional. It's non-negotiable because the system's output directly impacts people's fundamental rights and safety.
And what does that high-risk label immediately trigger? What are the strict legal requirements for the companies building and deploying ACE APR?
They're significant. Providers have to set up and maintain a really rigorous risk management system, and crucially, this runs throughout the system's entire lifecycle, from the initial design through deployment, updates, all the way to eventually taking it offline.
So it's not just a one-off check at the beginning.
No, it's continuous. A dynamic process aimed at catching and mitigating unintended negative consequences as they arise. And, very importantly, they have to implement robust data governance.
Which means what, exactly? Auditing the data.
Yes. Auditing the training, validation, and testing data sets. They need to prove the data is relevant, that it's sufficiently representative of all population groups, and critically, that it's certifiably free of those systemic errors, those historical biases we talked about.
So the law basically mandates that the industry has to actively hunt down and eliminate those structural flaws.
That's the goal. Plus, they need extensive technical documentation, ready to be handed over to regulators, showing how they're continuously meeting these high standards, especially around data quality and the mechanisms for human oversight.
Okay, so when you have these high-stakes decisions, criminal justice, major health diagnoses coming out of complex, often opaque black box deep learning models, explainability becomes essential. It's not just a nice feature, it's a mandatory legal need, right, to prevent what you called automatic justice.
Absolutely. XAI, explainable AI, is the mechanism that preserves due process. If you can't get authentic, understandable information about how the AI reached its conclusion, its prediction, then the system's usefulness is severely undermined. There's no accountability, no way to meaningfully challenge the finding.
So how does XAI work in practice? The source mentions 3 essential pillars.
Yes, 3 distinct but crucial pillars for XAI adherence.
Okay, walk us through them. Pillar 1.
First is the explanation itself. The system's output, its decision or score, it has to be reasoned out, not just computationally, but logically, intelligently, methodically. It needs to provide a kind of causal chain.
So more than just spitting out a risk score of 7.3.
Much more. It needs to reveal the computational steps, weigh the specific inputs that led to that score, identify which factors, which variables were most influential in making that particular prediction.
Okay, that makes sense. Pillar 2.
Pillar 2 is meaningful, and this is often the toughest one. The explanation has to be understandable to everyone who needs to understand it.
Not just the data scientists.
Definitely not just the data scientists. It has to make sense to the judge ruling on the case, the defense lawyer representing the person affected, and perhaps most importantly, the actual individual whose life is being impacted by the decision. A dense technical report full of equations isn't meaningful in this context. It needs translation into human understandable cause and effect.
Right. And the third pillar, explanation accuracy. Is this about whether the explanation is truthful?
Yes, but truthful in a specific way. It's crucial. Explanation accuracy means the explanation provided must accurately reflect the AI system's actual internal workings, the real reasons the algorithm flagged an anomaly or reached its conclusion.
So it's different from whether the prediction itself turned out to be right.
Very different. Predictive accuracy is about the outcome. Explanation accuracy is about the process. The explanation must be faithful to the machine's internal mechanics, even if that explanation leads to the prediction being overturned or challenged.
So XAI is really about ensuring humans stay in the loop as the ethical decision makers. It stops us from just delegating moral judgment entirely to the algorithm. The human role shifts from just starting the process to being an informed auditor, an ethical check.
Precisely. It maintains that critical human oversight. We can actually use some insights from the source materials, specifically a table in there, table 2, to kind of summarize the specific governance needed for the core risks we've been discussing. These are the essential human design patterns needed to counterbalance the AI.
Okay, let's start with the most fundamental risk we identified, the danger of hard-coding racial discrimination through things like predictive sentencing or risk scoring systems.
Right. For that specific risk, the necessary governance solution is mandatory data governance. This means rigorous, continuous audits of the training data, not just looking for errors, but actively searching for systemic historical biases and ensuring the data truly represents all demographic groups fairly. Basically, cleaning the data of past human discrimination before the AI learns from it.
Makes sense. What about the risk inherent in the system's design itself, this idea of universal dynamic monitoring, which leads to privacy erosion and that panopticon effect? How do you govern that?
That capability needs to be strictly controlled by applying necessity and proportionality principles, legally. Surveillance must be proven to be necessary for a specific, legitimate aim. It must be proportionate to the actual threat, and it must be targeted. This prevents the kind of indiscriminate population-wide monitoring that chills free expression and autonomy.
Okay. And finally, the risk of automated decision-making, where human judgment gets sidelined.
That requires the governance solution of mandatory human oversight, often called the human in the loop. And this oversight has to be reinforced by XAI, providing the necessary transparency. A human must always review, understand, and validate the system's output, its reasoning, before any serious action, especially punitive action, is taken. These constraints are vital to ensure that algorithmic optimization serves human values rather than replacing them.
Now, it's really important to remember ACE APR isn't just about crime. It's presented as this unified pattern recognition framework. Its capabilities aren't limited to the justice system. It's designed to spot systemic risk and optimize outcomes across, well, biology, economics, even the environment. Let's explore how this universal analysis applies in other high-stakes areas.
Yeah. This takes pattern recognition down to the deepest, most personal level. It's about fusing external behavioral data with internal human biology. For instance, the field of neurocriminology.
Neurocriminology, right.
It's starting to use AI modeling to integrate neuroimaging data, things like structural brain scans with various biological factors.
What kind of biological factors are we talking about here? Things like genetics?
Exactly. Genetic variants that might be statistically associated with aggression, maybe specific brain chemistry markers, hormonal influences, serotonin levels. AI is being explored for neuroprediction, trying to identify individuals who might have a statistically higher risk of reoffending or, say, violent episodes. The goal is often preventative intervention, usually within clinical or forensic settings. Or it might even be used to predict risks like self-harm or suicide by combining psychological assessments with physiological data streams.
And we see a parallel in precision medicine, right, using genomic data?
Absolutely. Traditional medicine often looked at single genetic markers for disease risk. Now, AI allows analysis of entire genome profiles across massive data sets like biobanks. This helps predict risks for complex multi-factor diseases, certain cancers, neurodegenerative conditions. The idea is to enable proactive, highly personalized treatments tailored to an individual's unique biological pattern.
Okay, but fusing these hidden biological patterns with predictive profiling, this feels like it introduces the most profound ethical challenge yet. This idea of the unmodifiable score.
It's a staggering challenge. Because if the AI can model a biological predisposition, a statistical likelihood of aggression or disease, based on your genes, your brain structure, things you largely can't change,
Right.
then society potentially gains the ability to score individuals based on these intrinsic, unchangeable traits. This opens the door to widespread stigmatization, discrimination, based purely on a statistical probability of future behavior or illness, rather than anything the person has actually done or any symptoms they actually have.
What are the legal implications there of this unmodifiable score? Does society suddenly get the right to limit someone's opportunities, maybe even their freedom, based on a biological pattern identified by an algorithm?
Our current legal frameworks are completely unprepared for this. Governing this successfully requires unprecedented new legal safeguards. We need rules to prevent interventions based solely on an unmodifiable internal biological score. Think about it. If your ACE-APR score is high, partly because you carry a genetic marker linked, statistically, to poor impulse control,
Yeah.
is it then legitimate to deny you a job, a loan, maybe even restrict your movement, even if you've never committed a crime? The focus shifts terrifyingly from what you do to what your biological data suggests you might do. It's predicting the person, not just the action.
Okay, let's shift from the individual to the systemic level. Looking at threats to the integrity of whole systems, like finance or political stability, where the sheer volume of data just swamps human analysts.
Right. In economics, for instance, AI pattern recognition is becoming essential for spotting complex, coordinated financial crimes. Think about something like large-scale procurement fraud. The amount of global transaction data makes human detection almost impossible.
Too much noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But AI can identify subtle, suspicious sequences, maybe in procurement schedules or pricing structures or vendor relationships patterns that might signal collusion, kickbacks, or complex money laundering schemes. It allows auditors to focus their efforts precisely where the risk is highest.
And in the political realm, we hear a lot about AI being used in early warning systems, EWS.
Yes, these EWS fuse data from all sorts of sources, satellite imagery, tracking population movements, data from IoT sensors, analysis of social media chatter. The goal is often to combat disinformation campaigns or predict potential social unrest, violence, maybe even interference in elections.
So they can give targeted alerts.
Exactly. They allow authorities or international bodies like the UN to sharpen their hazard forecasts, provide population-specific alerts, and hopefully protect communities from imminent threats. The UN's Early Warnings for All initiative is a good example of using this for public safety.
But this brings us right back to the dual-use dilemma, doesn't it? The same tech that protects democracy can be turned against it.
It's the absolute critical danger inherent in any universal pattern recognition tool. The source material points this out clearly. The same AI-powered facial recognition that might help an EWS track crowd movements during a disaster
Can be used by autocratic regimes.
immediately adapted by autocratic regimes to monitor public gatherings, identify protesters, and suppress dissent before it even starts. They can weaponize that predictive power, analyzing social media for signs of opposition, and then using sophisticated AI to generate and spread deepfakes or targeted propaganda to sow confusion and distrust among groups they see as a threat. The technology itself is neutral. Its impact depends entirely on who deploys it and why.
Okay, we've laid out the incredible potential and the really severe risks of something like ACE-APR. Let's pivot now towards, well, the constructive path, strategic development. How do we ensure human purpose isn't lost? If this level of insight is coming, how do we design the new tools, the new jobs, to make sure this technology augments us rather than controls us?
Well, one powerful idea is to invert the surveillance model. The highest form of dynamic monitoring could actually be when it's turned inward, used by the individual, totally opt-in for their own benefit. It's the opposite of the panopticon.
So using those monitoring capabilities, but strictly for personal health management.
Exactly. Imagine you choose to use a wearable device. It collects data only on your own activities, sleep patterns, heart rate variability, maybe even inputs from mood journaling. The AI learns your personal normal and not normal thresholds.
For internal threats.
Yes. For internal threats like rising stress levels, indicators of burnout, maybe early signs of self-harm ideation, or the onset of a depressive episode, when the system spots a statistically significant deviation from your personal pattern, it could alert you and maybe offer personalized suggestions for preventative action or seeking help. It becomes dynamic, personalized, preventative mental health care owned by the user.
That's a powerful concept. And on the flip side, since AI also makes creating disinformation easier, we need AI tools to fight back, to restore trust.
Absolutely. To counter that systemic pattern of AI being used to sow chaos and erode trust, we need new integrity tools. The source suggests things like AI-powered validation systems, tools that could maybe provide cryptographic proof that an image or video hasn't been tampered with or verify its origin. These could act as essential safeguards against deep fakes and manipulated content. We need to use the technology that creates the problem to also help solve it, to restore some basic trust in digital communication.
Let's also highlight how this level of pattern recognition can drive real, tangible benefits in sectors outside high-risk areas, demonstrating how it can augment human capabilities for good. How is it changing education, for example?
Well, in education, the big shift is away from one-size-fits-all learning towards highly personalized experiences. An AI system can model a student's unique learning patterns, how quickly they grasp different concepts, where they tend to stumble, what teaching approaches seem to work best for them.
And then tailor the curriculum.
Dynamically, yes. And tools are emerging, like the Tutor Navigator mentioned in the source, that leverage these kinds of insights. They match a student's observed traits, their learning patterns, their acquired skills, against complex patterns associated with different career paths. The idea is to optimize their educational journey for better economic outcomes and long-term personal fulfillment.
Okay. And in healthcare, staff shortages and burnout are huge issues there. How does AI help augment providers?
It helps by tackling the data overload. AI can process vast amounts of cyclic clinical data, synthesize complex patient histories, longitudinal records, genetic info, responses to past treatments, and derive meaningful, actionable insights from it all.
So it helps overwork staff.
Exactly. It can help mitigate those chronic shortages and reduce burnout by automating some diagnostic support tasks, maybe flagging patients who need urgent attention based on subtle pattern changes. It turns these mountains of unstructured data into immediate clinical insights, basically enhancing the human healthcare workers' effectiveness, freeing them up for direct patient care.
And finally, areas like communication or relationship management.
Yeah, AI agents are increasingly taking over the more transactional, time-consuming tasks. Things like scheduling meetings, complex data entry, even analyzing customer sentiment across different communication channels. By spotting patterns in customer behavior or feedback, the AI can offer personalized recommendations or flag issues.
Freeing up humans.
For the complex, high-value interpersonal stuff, the parts of the job that really need empathy, nuanced negotiation, critical judgment. It essentially elevates the human role by taking away the digital drudgery.
Now, that legal requirement we talked about, mandatory human oversight, especially for high-risk systems like ACE, APR, combined with the sheer complexity and ethical weight. It clearly means we're going to need new, specialized human jobs, roles focused entirely on oversight, interpretation, ethical judgment.
Absolutely. These new roles represent a shift in human labor, moving away from repetitive data analysis towards critical ethical reasoning and oversight. The source highlights a few key ones. First, the AI governance auditor.
Okay, what's their core job?
Their main function is ensuring real-time compliance with all those high-risk AI regulations we discussed. And that real-time aspect is vital, remember, because the algorithms themselves are constantly changing, mutating. So these auditors need to continuously monitor data lineage, specifically looking for systemic bias creeping back in.
Their fundamental purpose, then, is safeguarding basic liberties against algorithmic overreach.
Correct. Then, since explainable AI, XAI, is mandatory, you need someone who can actually bridge the gap between the AI's technical explanation and human understanding. That's the XAI interpretation specialist.
What do they do?
They operate primarily in judicial or forensic contexts. Their job is to translate the complex, often mathematical, reasoning of the algorithm into explanations that are meaningful and logical for judges, lawyers, juries, everyone involved. Their purpose is essentially to restore those due process safeguards against the risk of automatic justice delivered by a black box.
Makes sense. And the third role, linked to that personalized monitoring idea.
Right. That's the behavioral baseline mediator. This is a human specialist who would manage those personalized normal and not thresholds for individuals using dynamic health monitoring devices.
So they step in when the AI flags something.
Exactly. They intervene when the AI detects anomalies in someone's health indicators, or maybe flags an increased risk of self-harm. They provide the essential human context, maybe therapeutic intervention or guidance. These three roles, the auditor, the interpreter, the mediator, they ensure that algorithmic power and efficiency are always checked by human judgment, ethical consideration, and ultimately, human care.
So wrapping up this deep dive on the ACE APR paradigm, it seems clear that AI pattern recognition is fundamentally restructuring how we think about control and efficiency across almost every system imaginable. The patterns AI can find offer potentially huge benefits fighting complex corruption, enabling truly personalized medicine and education.
Yeah, the upside is undeniable, yet the analysis consistently brings us back to the extreme danger. If you let algorithmic efficiency run unchecked, It almost immediately creates severe risks. If that foundational training data is biased, the patterns the AI calculates will just amplify systemic discrimination. Measures meant to protect the public can morph into tools for hypercrime control, targeting people based on statistical risk profiles, especially when you start fusing that with latent, unchangeable biological factors.
So the most crucial pattern we need to understand and implement is the pattern of governance, of human accountability woven directly into the fabric of these systems.
It's absolutely non-negotiable. Systems like ACE APR must be treated as high risk. That demands strict adherence to mandatory data audits, continuous risk management, and the required presence of explainable AI, XAI, is key to making sure the system's outputs are meaningful, logical, transparent. That's how we prevent that slide into automatic justice that bypasses due process and human oversight.
And looking even further ahead, the source material leaves us with a pretty profound, almost philosophical conclusion about where this intensely predictive environment might be taking humanity itself.
It does. It suggests a potential future where human beings effectively become a kind of unification of data and physical body, where the data version of you, the informational actant as it calls it, actually becomes more significant in many ways than your physical body.
Wow. That's a staggering thought. Why would the informational version of you, your data entity, hold more weight than the organic, physical you?
Well, think about it. It's the informational actant, your data shadow, that is instantly analyzed, scored, leveraged, bought, and sold across global systems. It's that entity that possesses a kind of predictive power your physical body doesn't have on its own.
Right.
It's the entity assessed for your loan application, your insurance risk rating, your health prognosis, your potential stability score. In many ways, it's this informational self that truly navigates and interacts with the complexities of the modern digital world.
So the purposeful path forward, the challenge for us, is really about intentionally designing the systems, the tools, the job roles to ensure that the AI serves to augment the organic entity, the actual human being, and preserves our purpose, our agency.
Exactly. The goal has to be using prediction to enhance human safety, prosperity, well-being, not to try and colonize the future by eliminating all conceivable risk through pervasive, indiscriminate surveillance.
And that challenge, ensuring the primacy of the organic self in an age of the informational self, that's really the core issue for you, the listener, to grapple with as this technology continues to unfold.
Searching for answers to unanswered questions.
This is DigitView.